Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Everything with Everett. I'm happy that you joined me for the next episode, either A, in the podcast, or next episode in the installment series that I'm doing lately. Last episode was about abuse, my stories of child abuse and overcoming that. This one today is about grief. It's quite a bit more of a somber note. So if you are on the way to work, at work, susceptible to emotions, I would say this is probably a good place to pause or find another episode, another podcast to listen to right now, because this one could be a tearjerker. If not for you, definitely for me, and some people, sympathetic cry. So, fair warning, this is not going to be a gentle podcast. That said, it's very important to talk about the subject of grief. And I'm also going to help tie it into part of why I decided to do this series is you really needed the last podcast about abuse and my childhood to segue into this one, because this podcast is going to be about the loss of my dog Cedric, which happened a year ago today. A year ago at this time, I'm recording this at 4:15 on April 27th, 2021. A year ago, I lost my dog 4 hours ago. So, a year ago at this time, I was at my mom and stepdad Larry's house, and honestly, that was a good place to be because I wasn't alone. I was able to have someone to talk to, keep my mind off of, the gravity, the full gravity of the day, and not just dwell in it. I wanted to do this podcast earlier because I felt like it was something that needed to be shared and discussed. But I also, looking back, I was not ready for it, because a lot of times, even just thinking about writing this podcast, and it would always bring me to tears. So I'm happy to say that, I've gotten to the point where I still get teary, and I'm not going to be surprised if I get choked up thinking about things, but it's not as raw as it was, which that is also part of grief. And eventually you can talk about things without breaking down completely. So as you are aware that I just said, today I want to talk about my experience with grief. Now, grief is a response to loss, particularly the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss, it also has physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions. Does grief affect your body? Yes. It batters the immune system, leaving you depleted and vulnerable to infection. The heartbreak of grief can increase blood pressure and the risk of blood clots. Intense grief can alter your heart muscle so much that it causes a broken heart syndrome, a form of heart disease with the same symptoms as a heart attack. The 7 emotional stages of grief are usually understood to be shock or disbelief, denial, bargaining, guilt, anger, depression, and acceptance, leading into hope. The potential negative side effects of a grief reaction, can be significant and often aggravated by grief triggers, events that remind the grievers of their loved one or the circumstances surrounding their loss. I definitely was triggered for a long time. It didn't help living in the same place for several months after the passing of my dog, it felt like I could look at, just a benign corner of this apartment that countless people had lived in before me and will live in after me, but I could just see like a corner, and I could see Cedric everywhere. And so I started to really relate to why people, especially if like you have a spouse that passes on, I could definitely understand why somebody would want to get out of the house, sell the house, move away. Sometimes you need to remove yourself temporarily and then you can go back. Sometimes it's long term. For me, I don't live in that apartment anymore. Because a lot better things have happened and were in the process of happening when Cedric passed. B, we both deserved better than that apartment. Looking back, I probably could have afforded to get out sooner, but I didn't. And unfortunately, by the time the light was at the end of the apartment tunnel, it was too late for Cedric. He didn't get that backyard that I so very much wanted him to have for years, that he deserved. Just lost my space. Oh, okay. So triggers. So although most commonly discussed in reference to the death of a loved one, any major loss, for example, breakup of a relationship, job loss, loss of a living situation. So grief isn't just the death of a person. It can be, it's just the death of what was every day, what was maybe relied upon on a daily basis that now is no more. These can result in the grief reaction. Prolonged grief is a reaction to the loss that lasts more than 1 year, with the grief reaction affecting the sufferer's close relationships, disrupting his or her beliefs, and resulting in bereaved experiencing an ongoing longing for their deceased loved one. Mourning is the outward expression of the loss of a loved one and usually involves culturally determined rituals that help mourners make sense of the end of their loved ones' lives and give structure to what can feel like a very confusing time. It is influenced by personal, familial, cultural, religious, and societal beliefs and customs. The potential negative effects of grief reaction can be significant and often aggravated by triggers, events that remind the grievers of their loved one or circumstances surrounding their loss. I honestly, I would say about 2 months, I really couldn't walk around my apartment without like seeing an instant replay of, like, superimposed on what I was looking at, of that last morning with Cedric. That's another reason why I'm happy I'm not in that apartment, just because it wasn't pleasant anymore after he was gone to be there. So just finishing up a synopsis on grief. The risk factors for experiencing more serious symptoms of grief for a longer period of time are related to the survivor's own physical and emotional health before the loss, the relationship between the bereaved and their family member or other loved one, as well as the nature of the death. Grief-stricken individuals who feel the death of their loved one is unexpected or violent may be at greater risk for suffering from major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, or prolonged grief. So I guess before I dive into kind of my experience, if you are experiencing grief, if you had a loss in your life in the past, currently, or in the future. First, you are not alone. Second, don't let anyone tell you what is normal or what you should do. There are healthy suggestions that can be made and should be accepted. Those are not forcing yourself to relive those events. It's okay to analyze for a period of time what happened and maybe, kind of grasp and get your mind around kind of what happened. But it is extremely healthy at some point to encourage yourself to let go of reliving those moments, especially on a daily basis. If you're reliving them and it just keeps bringing you to tears, again, it's okay for a period of time. But I would say 6 months out, a year, you definitely need to be working towards letting it go. It doesn't change that it happened, or it doesn't change the value. At some point you have to choose your own health and sanity, and choose to move forward from that situation. And that's not to say that things won't pop up and you won't, be moved to emotion later on. Like, that's part of the thing with, there's no, this is what everyone goes through. And if anyone tries to tell you or belittle your situation because they've gone through it and it wasn't that bad or whatever, that's not helpful. And with Cedric, I had people tell me, like, several months out, I was like, oh, I miss it. Like, I would share pictures of it. And I kind of got to a point where it was hard for me to share pictures because even though I still felt a lot of loss, I was starting to feel judged for grieving. And at one point, someone dear to me didn't mean it in the negative way that I heard it, but someone told me, that they had lost pets in the past and that it was unfortunate, but kind of basically like suck it up and move on kind of a thing. Again, that wasn't their words and that wasn't their intention. I know that. But I also now know too, saying things like that does not help. Even though you so badly want to help someone that's maybe hurting, there are things that just don't help. So now I just had a friend lose his dog that I met. She was a great dog. She was about Cedric's age, or Cedric would have been about her age. He just went through the loss, posted, about losing her. And the truest and best response that I could give in light of my own loss was, this is not an easy process. I can relate to you. I feel you. I'm here if you want to talk. You just need to validate the person's experience. That's really the best thing that you can say. If it's their first loss and you've had, several under your belt, great for you. You're kind of an expert at loss then, and maybe able to kind of bounce back from things. But for someone who's just experiencing their first loss, it's important to lead with your heart and to just validate their feelings and encourage them to keep moving forward for themselves, their families, and their future. But if they want to stop and, smell the flowers along the way, let them. Eventually they'll, through your gentle nudging, remember they need to keep walking forward. So, all right, I'm going to jump into this. So if you want to stop now, you got a nice little grief prequel. It's about to get more serious and possibly heavy from here on out. So, like I said earlier, if you are more predisposed to tears and emotional connection, now would probably be a good time to listen to this later in a private setting avoid it completely. As much as I hate saying that, I do like the fact, having people listen through, but if this is just something you're not ready to hear, please take that time and space for yourself. Please also come back if you want to give it a try. Take it in small doses. You don't have to listen to it all at one time. Do it in a private place where you won't be judged or seen, or where it won't impact your outlook or image, if that's a concern to you. But anyway, here goes my story of grief. So in connection to my podcast, God, I want to say last week, but it wasn't last week. The one about child abuse. So that one segues into this. If you listen to that, I obviously had a childhood of abusive behavior from my father. And not to beat a dead horse or anything, but it built up on me for a long time, for years. Well, in 2009, my father gave me a handgun, which I still own. And it's fun to go shoot with, but it's something that I very rarely use. It's locked away. It's not something that I access regularly or anything like that. So he gave me a gun in 2009. Don't know why, it just was a thing. We never went shooting. Like, he wasn't like a hunter. We didn't go target practice. I don't know why, like, just probably a very conservative, everyone needs a gun. So everybody got a gun for Christmas. And so I had this gun. And I think that it was becoming very clear that, and I was in college at this point, I think it was becoming very clear that I was not happy. Things were building up on me. Like, I was kind of getting tired of what my life actually looked like at that point. So I think that it was getting to the point where even he, as an abuser, could see what was happening. I don't think that it ever truly occurred like, oh, this is my doing or whatever. But it was just very clear that I wasn't hiding it as well as I had before. So we were doing the work thing and all that, and I was producing his radio show at the time. And also kind of part of why it was, the abuse was still happening. It was, God, it sounds weird to like look back and say this, but I was an adult and he was still like abusing me and belittling me, berating me, all kinds of crap. And so like I would produce his show, and occasionally during like commercial breaks, if we didn't have a guest, like everything sounded fine. He was all great and friendly to the public on the radio. But once his mic was off and it was commercial time, he was either great to be around and we had a great time, or he was upset about something and nitpicking. I remember he would just, get mad at me if a song wasn't queued up right, or he didn't like it. And he would be like, I could do this myself if I wanted to. And I'm the type, I've told him several times in my life, like, then why don't you do it? And he's like, well, I could, but I'm the host. He viewed himself as higher than me, even though at being the board op and call screener, like I was, looking back, I'm the reason that he had a radio show. I got it on the air. Whoever operated the board is the reason he had a radio show, because we were the ones getting the commercials going, the music, turning him on, making sure everything sounded right, screening the calls, putting them on the air, while he sat back, read something in the newspaper or online, or talked to a guest and drank coffee. So anyway, things were not doing great, still kind of depressive around the house. And then a year later, 2010, we had just moved to KBOY from KIDO. And I think we were getting ready to expand to being on Sundays as well. But anyway, we got the newspaper, came to the Idaho Press Tribune, came to the station on Bannock, and we'd occasionally read through it and stuff. Anyway, one day he looked through the newspaper and found advertisement for golden retriever puppies. And just out of the blue, like it hadn't been a discussion before. We had several dogs at home. We had 3 dogs. And he goes, "Would you like a dog?" And I was like, "Oh, that sounds fun." And I was like, "Sure, yeah." And I wasn't sure if this was one of his, fantasy ideas that's like a bait and switch or the carrot on the end of the stick. I didn't know if it was actually going to happen, but it sounded like a good idea to me. I wasn't getting too many of my hopes up because just like all my childhood, I knew that things would fall through. I knew that he'd get you all excited and like, "We're going to do this. And like, yeah, this is great." And then you never hear about it again. And it's like, well, when are we going to get it? I never promised that. Or like just totally gaslight you and made you really just question whether or not you were present for what you knew you were. Anyway, so we talked about getting this dog, and it happened rather quick. I think we called them that night. We went and had like lunch as a family, made some phone calls to the people that had him. The dog was born in Paul, Idaho. The family that had him up for adoption was in Nampa. We lived in Nampa. And anyway, we ended up going there that night and picking them up. It was December 19th, I believe, 2010. Cold winter December day. It ended up snowing that night, and they didn't want to take a check because they had some bad experiences in the past. So I literally sat in the garage at these people's house with the dog that I named Cedric, and just sat there for an hour while my father went back into town because they're, south of Nampa, about half an hour south of Nampa. And he had to go to the bank and withdraw money from the ATM to pay them cash. And then we ended up leaving with the dog. And so we got Cedric. I went to the now missing Marie Callender's restaurant. We went there. That's where we went for lunch, and wasn't sure, it was like, "Oh, what are you going to name him?" And my stepmom was there. My sister was there. And my stepmom mentioned that she had a pet that back in the day, and it was named Cedric. And I was like, "That's a cool name. I like that." So we named him Cedric and brought him home that night. We were heading up to my grandparents in Washington. That was the last time we went up there for Christmas due to family drama. And went up there, took all the dogs to boarding, but Cedric was only like 15, 16 weeks old. So he was far too young for boarding, didn't have all of his shots, just they weren't going to take him. So we put all the dogs in boarding. We were planning to drive anyway, so we just took Cedric with us, and Cedric sat down by my feet and up on my lap the whole ride there. He was a little tiny little fuzzy football. So cute. I have tons of pictures. That's one thing I will say, if I can pause for a second. Take a bunch of pictures of everything you love, because that to me is the only tangible eternal life that we have on earth. I don't know if there's eternal life after this life. I hope there is, but the truth is nobody actually knows. But having pictures and videos and ways to bring a loved one back to your senses, whether you see them with your eyeballs or you touch something that was theirs, or if you have like a chunk of their hair, like something tangible that allows you to re-experience them and keep their memory fresh in your head, is totally worth it. So take all the pictures you can. It's amazing how fast kids and dogs grow up. Like look back at all the pictures I took, and it felt like on a weekly basis, he was doubling in size. It was great. And then he had his teenage years. Like, he looked like the little teenage dog, and he was just the cutest. So he came home. Everything was fine. Life was still, the way it was in that podcast that I shared. Obviously, I was an adult at this point, going to college and all that jazz. But things are still not healthy for me. I'm not happy with life, but Cedric was definitely a beacon of hope. And I remember my father actually told me when he gave me Cedric, he said, "Yeah, I wanted to give you a reason to smile." And so that's how I knew that he knew I was not happy or in a good place, but that was how we handled it. I'll give you a dog. Like, I want you to smile, like, kind of a thing. But nothing about changing his own behavior, like no true ownership. So while I admit that Cedric was a blessing from my father, who was, everything that you heard in the last podcast, it's not like that was his saving grace. Anyway, so we ended up moving in 2011, the next year. And, oh gosh, things just still weren't going well. I kind of feel like our father was still wanting to control us, but also very blatantly faced with the fact that we were now adults, and kind of like, I think he was just getting tired of us. So, and this is leading up into why my grief experience was so heavy. So I'm not trying to, kick a dead horse, so to speak. So I think that all those years of, controlling us and keeping us down and not letting us grow and flourish on our own kind of was backfiring at this point, because suddenly, I've got these kids that are grown adults and they're still living at home and have no, push and independence of their own to get out of here. Oh crap. So then he was like putting pressure on us, even though the entire situation was his own making. So read into that what you will. Things devolved to the point where later that year, I think we'd only been there a month or two at this new house where he currently lives. My sister just up and moved overnight, just left the cell phone, the car, like all the things that my father would have used as strings to pull her back. She just dropped him and walked away. And he was totally beside himself. He had no way to reach her. He had no way to know where she was. Nothing. Couldn't do you're driving my car. Like, he was the type of person that if you were driving his car, he would be like, well, if you don't come home, I'm going to report it as stolen. Even though it's not true, he would, scare you because he thought you were too dumb to understand. And to a degree, we didn't fully understand things the way we do now. But he would leverage things, and he had no leverage. And that was just so like, wow, total to my sister for, having the cojones to just get out. Anyway, so that kind of inspired that thinking in me, like, well, why am I still here? I'm older than she is. Like, this is ridiculous. So it's 2011. It's November, early December, close to Thanksgiving, I want to say. I'm definitely in a depressive funk. Just kind of maintaining things, doing, work around the house for my father, doing my schoolwork, taking care of Cedric, other dogs, just kind of being like a manservant to my father. And anyway, one night, I don't remember what precipitated why I was feeling this way, but one night it got so bad that I told you in the last one about how I wanted to, step in front of a bus and all that. Thoughts of suicide have been through my life several times. They've decreased significantly to the point where, there's nothing anymore really, because I've found I've defined my own worth outside of other people. So anyway, in 2011, late 2011, I was definitely, depressed, feeling down, sad, over everything, frankly. And I came up with a plan. And or maybe this was spring of 2012. I remember it was wintertime. It was really cold outside and it was dark a lot of the time. Because my sister moved out in, I want to say it was like November. We moved to that house in like October of 11. And then I think she moved out a month later. So November, December. So it would have either been right after she moved out or a couple months after. So maybe January, February. Anyway, so I was feeling very depressed and decided, you know what? I'm going to go get that gun that he gave me. I'm going to go back to this huge property, just massive property. And out in the back was where we buried our dog Cecil. Was a golden retriever, lived to be 13, died of cancer. Great dog, helped train Cedric. Cedric and Cecil played a lot. It was just kind of cute to watch Cedric or Cecil become like a young pup again with my puppy. And I got some really cute pictures of Cedric when he was a little fuzzy meatloaf, and Cecil when he's like an old aging dog that was well beyond his prime. So it was out. My mind was thinking about this spot out back of the property, at the property line, by the fence, in the back. Bunch of trees out there, kind of like obscure from just looking out and being able to see everything. And I was going to go back there with a tool that I had been given and was going to use it and end some things. And I don't know if this was part of me thinking like, whoa, this isn't right, and here's something else. I don't know if it was God. I, at the time, attributed it to God. I don't know. I don't know. Either way, whatever happened, whatever the source of this voice that, or thought, whatever it was, it helped. So I'm thankful regardless of its source. Something came to mind and was like, okay, so you go back out there, you do this, takes care of your problems. What about your mom? What about your stepdad? What about your sister? My grandpa was still alive at the time. Both I still had 3 grandparents alive. What about them? Just thinking about all these people that, do they deserve a goodbye? Kind of like, whoa. And that was unsettling to me. But what I felt like was kind of the real clincher and the bow on top of stopping all this was the thought and the question of who takes care of Cedric, and I this is how it came across to me. All right. So you're going to go do this. You're going to go take care of that. Who's going to take care of Cedric? And then, it was kind of like a dialogue back and forth. And it's like, well, I would want my sister to take care of him. And then it was like, well, that may be your wish, but if you're gone, you can't actually decide that. Somebody else might actually keep him. And I think you can read between the lines and figure out who somebody else is. And I definitely didn't want that person who suggested the silent treatment, if you remember from the abuse podcast, of how to raise this dog. I didn't want that person to own, care, neglect anything. I didn't want that person in charge of this dog. And so that was what stopped me, was because I knew that, you know, that was how I was feeling. That was a solution. But I also knew that even then I had no control over Cedric's well-being, upbringing, care, health, or life. And also I didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to not be there. So in a nutshell, Cedric became my purpose at that point. And I wasn't very shy about sharing that with some people. Obviously since then, you know, as I've matured, I've found more reasons, you know, to be confident in myself, more reasons to live. Purpose is myself. Purpose is also other people. But the saving grace and what would have been an effective resolution was Cedric. And so I started to view Cedric as like my guardian angel. He was my guy. He was my kiddo. He was the soul that I needed to be here to take care of. So I didn't do anything. That made up my mind. I had to take care of Cedric. And I got my first full-time job in September 2012. Met a person that was not the best for me. It was also an abusive relationship. There was some responsibility on my part, but also a lot on his. And anyway, so met this person at work, doubled my income, really gave me the means to actually change my life and get out of the father's house. So I remember telling my father, about a month after I got this job, I said, I'm moving out. And I remember my father was so pissed, just so mad that he didn't have all this warning. Like, I think I was like, oh, by the way, next week I'm moving out. Like, we went and found an apartment. I signed a lease, because my father was starting to be like, oh, well, if you're going to live here and you're not going to do what I say, and you're not going to go to school, then, because I already had a degree at that point. I got my associates in May of 12, and it was he wanted me to go to school. And I was like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm tired of going to school and being your puppet. And so I decided to move out. He was wanting me to pay rent. And I was like, if I'm going to pay rent, I might as well have some say. I might as well live somewhere where I want to be and enjoy and actually have a voice in what happens if I'm paying rent. I'm not going to pay rent to someone who's then going to tell me how to live. So I moved out and broke those ties. Cedric and I ended up moving back to the house with my then fiance. A year later, when my father was like, oh, well, we're moving out of state. And then my father ended up staying there most of the time, using all just lights, just wasn't contributing anything to the bills, but was living there for free. It was his house, but it's ridiculous. And I was paying, my significant other at the time was unemployed, so I was literally paying 2/3 of the bills, and my sister was paying 1/3. And my father got in a argument with me over my sexuality and how tried bringing up these archaic laws, oh, well, I don't think this is even a legal lease with you shacking up with your boyfriend, and I didn't know that you really. And yeah, anyway, so we moved out. I went and got the largest U-Haul truck I could. I was still paying the monthly rent on our apartment in Boise. So my money was definitely all accounted for. And anyway, it was clear that moving back to Nampa under the guise of helping my father was not sufficient. And so I got the largest U-Haul truck I could. We loaded, we didn't sleep for 24 hours. We just packed all day and night. And we were out of there by the end of the week and back in the apartment. And I never went back to living with my father. So Cedric was my purpose. Lived for years with him. Like, we had a great time in the apartment, had a tie out for him. He could lay out in the grass. This was after 2015. Me and the person I referenced broke up, and that was a mess in 2014, 2015. So we broke up. I moved into my own place, lived on my own from 2015 till 2020. And until I met my current fiance, Jeremy, and now we live together in a house that we're renting that Cedric would have loved. Nice big old backyard in Southeast Boise, just beautiful. And anyway, so in the apartment, little tiny 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 500 square foot apartment that I originally got for like $635 a month, was finally paying up to, good God, what did I end up? I think my last lease I signed there was just over $800 a month. They wanted to raise me up more than that. They wanted to jump me up by as much as $200 a month 1 year. And I was like, geez. And they were remodeling. The housing market just went through the roof. And even if you're renting, you're lucky to have a roof over your head these days. It's very stressful. Anyway, so in the apartment, I had the tie out. I gave Cedric that appeal of having a backyard as much as I could. Thankfully, we were on a ground floor. He could just go outside. Everyone loved him. He had this way about him. He just like would stick his chest out, just like, look, like what? And he just had that like very statuesque, perfect, beautiful golden red, golden retriever look to him. He didn't have that. He was one of those golden retrievers that didn't have the, long pointy nose and the pointy top of his head. He was very, blocky. He had kind of a blocky head, but he had big shoulders, big leg, and then like hair that fanned off his legs and his tail, and those cute little blonde chaps that golden retrievers have on the back of their legs. And I made the mistake of shaving him a couple times. Don't ever shave a golden retriever. As cute as it looks, and as much as you intend for it to be a good thing, I've actually read that it's not a good thing, and that their hair is structured to keep them cool, even though it looks like they're wearing a winter coat all the time. You actually defeat their natural systems for cooling by shaving it off. So if you have a golden retriever, want to get a golden retriever, or know someone that has a golden retriever, encourage them, and if it's yours, don't ever shave them, because that's not good for them. Anyway, so I'd let Cedric hang out in the grass. He'd lay in the grass and I'd rub my feet on him. He was very much my dog. He would follow me everywhere, kind of a thing. If I was in the bathroom, so this might be a little bit TMI for you, but I wouldn't shut the door to the bathroom when I'd use it, because Cedric always had to know where I was. So I always wanted him to see, he'd just lay there and just kind of glance around like, oh, there you are. Okay. And like I said, it was a tiny, tiny little apartment. But we used to bond over things like he loved tomatoes, and I love tomatoes too. So I'd go buy a bunch of cherry tomatoes, and the ones that were kind of like wrinkly and squishy and just less than appealing, I would toss those his way and he'd eat them. And there was a period where I was enjoying it, like eating on ice cubes, and he liked ice cubes. So we would either share a tray of tomatoes or a tray of ice cubes, or sometimes I'd, make a roast and I'd trim off all the fat and the parts that I really didn't want, but were still appealing to a dog. Let him have those. I didn't give him a lot of food human food because he had a very sensitive stomach, and his ears would flare up because they were floppy, and golden retrievers are prone to that. If their ears are down, it kind of retains the moisture a bit more than dogs that have the ears that are permanently up. And so if he had like bone marrow or too much meat, or I don't know what exactly, but if he had anything that just didn't agree with his body, it would cause a flare up, yeast infections. And it was a ongoing battle. I had a routine down, for the first couple of years, I didn't, know what I was doing. And every time I'd take him to the vet, that was a $200 bill, then get all the stuff and the ointments and have to do everything. And, then I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I can save myself a bunch of money by not going to the vet every time to confirm what it is. So I just started stocking up on the medicated wash and the ointments. And whenever he had an issue, I would, tend to that. And I remember, several times throughout the years where, it'd be the middle of the night and I'd hear him, he'd always would sleep next to me on the bed. And when I started dating Jeremy, he became a little bit jealous, and he would actually lay on the side of the bed where Jeremy did, so much so to where he even then started putting his head on Jeremy's pillow. And then when Jeremy came out, he'd have to wipe all this hair off, Cedric hairs. But I think Cedric and I both just like the smell of Jeremy. And I think that also Cedric, he knew that the time of him being, my guy, was becoming numbered. And anyway, so I could, if he'd hop off the bed, I could, feel the bed jiggle. I'm a rather light sleeper, and I would wake up if I could hear him picking out his ears with his toenails and stuff. And I could hear he'd make this little grunt noise. If he's digging, how that is when you're digging in your ears and you're like, oh, that feels good. Yeah, that's that spot. He would make these noises and I could tell. And I would get up and go tend to him and be like, oh, is your ear bothering you? And then he didn't like when I would intervene like that, but I could also tell that he knew that it helped him. So his ear would be all warm and swollen, and I'd flush it out and wipe it out. And it was a gross problem. Sometimes this was 2 a.m, 3 a.m, just middle of the night, Dad just sitting there with Indian style legs and cleaning out his ear. And he's just oh, and sometimes he'd just fall asleep. I'd rub his tummy and he'd fall asleep for a bit. And if I had nothing better to do, I'd just sit there and pet him for half an hour, and he'd fall asleep on the floor, laying on his back. And we had a good time. I think that just became part of our routine, part of our life together. So the hard part of this podcast is coming up here. So this went on for years. 4 years that we lived there, he was, gradually aging. Everything was fine. He'd go outside, but he mostly was an indoor dog. We'd go for walks. He'd go to the bathroom. He unfortunately was under the belief that walking on the leash was to go potty. So I could never take him to the greenbelt because he wouldn't just casually walk alongside you. He was constantly looking for ways to pee and poo. And eventually it's dude, you have nothing's coming out of you. You can quit. And he was always curious, wanted to sniff things. I think he would have enjoyed being outside more early on in life. And that's one thing I kind of wish that I did. But I've also learned not to be too hard on retrospective things like that. He definitely had a good life. I took care of him. I know that. I did everything I could for him. And it is what it is. It really is. So anyway, we went through, life, and he was doing his stuff, and I was getting ready to hopefully buy a house. So I started getting rid of furniture and things, and that didn't go as planned. And the housing market was just starting to really creep up, and I couldn't get a house, but I was dumb and got rid of a lot of furniture too soon. So he might have enjoyed the fact that he had more space, but I think he also didn't like the fact that he didn't have a chair to lay on anymore, where he could just easily watch people. Like his life the last year there was kind of uprooted a bit, because I was so eager to get out of that apartment and get something better for him and myself, that when I had to sign another lease and wait a little longer, we just had less in there. Again, it was good for him because it was a tiny apartment, so he had more space. But, and looking back, I don't know how I lived in that tiny footprint. But he definitely enjoyed when I bought another queen bed, and because for a while I was just sleeping on the floor. But he enjoyed when Jeremy and I got together, and Jeremy would come over from his house in Nampa. And so I wanted a place for me and Jeremy to hang out and, be able to lay down and watch TV in the bedroom and whatnot. And don't you be going down no naughty paths. But Cedric definitely was so happy when I had a new queen bed. He could actually lay on it, and he was so happy. So he would lay on Jeremy's side. There did come a time where he started to visually get older. He started, getting a little bit of the grays around the eyebrows and parts of his head, but he didn't overly look like an old dog. I remember I was shocked when he was 9, and was he 9? Yeah, he had just turned 9, and the vet was like, "Oh, what kind of food are you feeding him?" And I was like, "Oh, I feed him this," and they're like, I was feeding him Purina dog chow, the national brand. And they're like, "We recommend transitioning dogs to senior dog food at age 8, and he should probably get switched over." And I was like, 8? You consider that's an old dog? Okay. I was used to dogs living to 15 and stuff. I must have just been lucky as a kid, but because big dogs don't usually live that long. Anyway, so I remember it was a huge shock that I had to put him on this old dog food. And so I got, Zamzo's, Grandma Z's senior dog food, $56 a bag, good stuff. And he liked it, but he definitely seemed, in the last year, he aged very quickly and started to get more gray around his eyes. He was definitely undeniably deaf, because I could come home and he wouldn't hear me being home. He loved laying in the sun in my southwest facing sliding glass door. And he loved laying on the hot carpet, even in the summertime. Sometimes I'd even lay down there with him and just soak up the sunshine. But, he started looking older, and I remember having the thought, I don't know why for sure, but I was like, I don't think he's going to be around a whole lot longer. And just to put things into perspective, with what I had in mind with that thought was I was acknowledging that I didn't think he would be alive in 5 years. I didn't know he was going to not be around in less than 2. So I knew he was getting older. I was starting to be home more on my days off and just hang out with him. I was trying to be more intentional about spending time with him, going on walks, being with him. And I really enjoyed seeing Cedric when Jeremy would come over. Cedric was a very particular person, dog, being. He liked people or he didn't. And he wasn't shy about letting me see what his thoughts on somebody were. He was, he wanted to be in your face. If you weren't a dog person, he did not like you. He never did anything mean to anyone, but he just would kind of like give me this, like, I like this person's here, not worth your time kind of a thing. And just like annoyed, and like sometimes he'd go hang out somewhere else. But with Jeremy, he took to Jeremy like I've never seen him take to anybody else. So I definitely feel like Jeremy got Cedric's blessing. And I have a picture that I took 6 months before Cedric passed away, and it's Cedric and Jeremy, and Cedric's like looking straight at the camera. So is Jeremy. And it's my lock screen on my phone. It's been my lock screen for the past, ever since Cedric died, honestly. I've changed phones several times. So it's the picture that I use because it's the best way that I can show how much Cedric liked and loved Jeremy, and was kind of like giving me his blessing. So, April came. Well, let's backtrack just a tad. March, February, 2020 happened. Let's start there. COVID-19. It was, everyone's year was all weird. Things were locking down. It was, it's a New York thing, but it's crazy to look back at the beginning of 2020 and think of what we thought was a big deal. And now it's just like, oh, how young and naive we once were. But we were doing like the lockdown thing, kind of minimizing travel. Weren't going out to eat anymore. The last time I went to a movie theater was in March of last year. And we were just being more cautious about what we were doing and why. So Jeremy would still come over. We were like, if he had any feelings of being sick or I did, like we would be cautious and skip out on seeing each other for that week. But we were still, getting in time together. We ordered, pizza and stuff and ate pizza on our patio at the apartment. And it was just kind of our space, our pad, me, Jeremy, and Cedric. And just three dudes just hanging out. And we'd, watch a movie, and Cedric would join us up I had a little twin bed in the living room that I use as like a couch space to kind of hang out and lay down. And Cedric would lay up there during the day by himself, or he'd lay up there with us when we were all there watching a movie. And it was a nice time. And so lockdown happened, the beginning of COVID, the drill. Scarcity at the grocery store. And then on March 30th, I experienced my first earthquake with Jeremy and Cedric. And we're sitting there playing Minecraft. And I had, it was the first time I had heard about this game, was playing on an old PS3 that Jeremy brought over. It was a fun game. We had fun just building a world together and just exploring this game together. And we were sitting there, and I just remember it felt like I just was hearing like this like squeaking, like the floor above me. And like I said, I was on the first floor. There was two floors above us. And I remember hearing, it sounded like, like a big person walking on the floor, like the squeak, squeak, squeak. But it sounded different. And I remember it was really loud and all over. And it's this, the person that lived up there at the time was this kind of, older, skinny dude. And I'm like, he wasn't that big. So like, what the heck is he doing? But I remember thinking like, what is going on? Why is the whole ceiling squeaking? And I looked, and I could see the walls moving, and I looked outside, and I could see like, I can't describe it. Like the sound, it was clear that the building was moving. And I felt it, and Jeremy was like engrossed into the video game. And I was like, what is that? And then, he thought I was asking about the game, but I was like, no, I think we're having an earthquake. And then Jim was like, what? So we got up, and, you're not supposed to run outside because you can, get hit by stuff, but also the thought of being on a first floor apartment and potentially having this, 20-year-old apartment building come crashing down on me didn't sound appealing either. So what we did was we went to the sliding glass door, and I was like, you know what, if this thing starts to collapse, at least we literally have to run 3 feet and we're out of the building. I only had 2 ways out of the apartment, and that was one of them. And, other people started running out of their apartments. Like, it was kind of like a communal realization, like, we're in an earthquake right now. And it felt like minutes, but it was seconds. It was significantly long, like long enough to where like everybody registered it. But so we had our first earthquake. So that was kind of the beginning of the, oh my God, did that just happen time frame for 2020. So recovered from that. A few weeks later, had a tremble follow-up that happened while I was by myself. I was sitting there like it was a really quick one, but it was enough for me to go, I remember that feeling. And I was sitting in the same spot, and it was just like, ugh. And now I'm like jonesing for another earthquake. I'm just like, oh, I want another earthquake. Like, let's feel that again, or let's see how this house survives, kind of a thing. Anyway, we haven't had an earthquake yet. Again. But so resumed everything. The whole COVID thing was going on. April happened. We were, going out to eat and stuff, celebrated our, what was it? 6-month anniversary. We went to Jalapenos, did the whole outdoor pick up the food thing, went back to the apartment, ate. I remember Cedric wanted some of the food, and I gave him some of our chips. And I tried to always give him something, but like I said, I was mindful of what I gave him because it could cause issues that I had to then take care of and mitigate for possibly weeks. So gave him some chips. And then on the 18th, I took pictures of after work. I played some fetch with him. I had just given him this blue and orange Pokeball that he really liked. I still have it. That was one of his favorite toys at the end. He loved that thing. He'd pick it up, he'd toss it, and it was one of those pressurized ones, so he didn't have to worry about it, deflating and puncturing and all that. And so on the 18th, I got some pictures of us playing. Everything was fine. There were no warning signs looking back that anything was about to happen. There's, we didn't power through anything. There wasn't anything in hindsight where I'm like, I should have taken him to the vet, like nothing. So I took pictures of him playing. I got his little side-eye smolder that he would do. Some pictures that I cherish. My parents had ordered some Chinese food from Panda Express, and they had some extra that they didn't want to eat, or it was just too much for them. So I went over and contactlessly picked it up from them and took it home. I ate it, and I let Cedric lick the containers. I got a picture of him with his whole snout inside of a Panda Express box, just licking the inside of those babies. He loved it. And then about 4 days, within a week of him passing, I also went to Carl's Jr. and I had a spicy jalapeno double. He loved pepper jack cheese. Like, him and I had so much in common. But so he wanted some of it. I could tell he was sitting there doing his classic begging thing, and I was like, you know what? You're a cute old dog. You deserve it. I'll give you some. So I'm thankful that I gave him a nice bite of my double cheeseburger with a piece of pepper jack cheese on it. So he enjoyed that. So I worked, did my work week, got off on Sunday. That was the let's see. Saturday would have been the 25th. 26th was a Sunday of April. We hung out. I think we laid on the sofa. I think Jeremy might have come over. I don't know. It was kind of a normal weekend. I don't have any pictures that I took that day. I remember, I think if Jeremy was over, he ended up leaving, because I remember I was playing Minecraft, because I got pretty addicted to it. And that night is the last night that I played it. Because I lost interest in a lot of things after the 27th. I definitely went into depression. So 26 was a Sunday, did my thing, hung out with Cedric, ran errands, whatever. Played Minecraft till like midnight. It was very late. Midnight, 1 in the morning, maybe 2. I remember I was like, oh crap, I need to go to bed. And Cedric was there with me in the living room. No, he had gone to bed in the bedroom, and then he came out into the living room like, hey, are you coming to bed? And so I remember he walked me back to the bedroom. I remember petting him and saying, all right, buddy, well, have a good night. I'll see you in the morning. We went to bed. Monday, the 27th. I woke up about 4 or 5 hours later to the unmistakable smell of dog poop in the apartment. Cedric had accidents. Like, I will never forget the smell of dog. Fecal matter. Don't know what term to call it. But anyway, so I woke up to that undeniable smell. So I'm like, oh crap, he had an accident. And I go to get up out of bed, and he's laying on the side of the bed at the foot, like on my side of the bed, but just down from me. And I can smell it there where he's at. I walk out, and I notice that there's some diarrhea on the linoleum in the entryway and some in the carpet next to the back door. Another pause. Cedric was so good. He had accidents occasionally, and maybe I give him more credit for intelligence than he had. I don't know. But I remember telling him one time, I said, look, buddy, I get that you have accidents, and that's fine. And we'll get through them. I'll clean them up. It is what it is. But I remember telling him one time, I was like, if you have at all any control, aim for a hard surface. Like, go to the linoleum. I had carpet everywhere except like the kitchen, the bathroom, and the entryway. It had that linoleum fake wood stuff. And I told him, I was like, if you absolutely have to go and I'm not here or awake or whatever, go into one of those areas. It's so much easier for me to clean up. I can just scoop it up, mop it, whatever, done. Easy peasy. I don't have to shampoo the carpet, whatever. So I remember even then thinking like, oh, he had an accident. And yes, there was a small bit on the carpet, but there was also some in the entryway. It was a softer consistency. So like kind of a bit of a diarrhea. But I also noticed a slide mark in it that indicated that his paw had slipped in it. So he was walking something. I don't know what it looked like, but he slipped. And he ended up getting some on his tail and his hindquarters. But this whole time, he's just laying on the floor next to my bed. And I'm thinking, he's nervous. He thinks he's in trouble. He was really he was very aware. If he had an accident, he knew. And so I was like, come on, buddy, let's go get you Cleaned up in the bathroom. Let's come on. And he was kind of doing a little bit of the shaking, like kind of like the nervousness. And I was like, you're okay. You're fine. I was like, come on. But he just wouldn't stand up. And initially, like I said, I thought that was him afraid that he was in trouble. But then it became more apparent that he couldn't stand up and he was having trouble. So I helped him. I lifted up his chest, helped him stand. We got him to the bathroom. He hated water. So he, like every time I would bathe him in the bathtub, he usually just stood or he'd sit. He would never lay down. He didn't want water near his head. He didn't want it on his paw. For being a golden retriever, he had trauma when he was a pup and we had to take him to Washington. He fell in a lake when he was like 15 weeks. And maybe that trauma, I don't know. He never wanted to voluntarily be in water above his elbows, unless he was thirsty. But that was then just to get a drink. But he never swam. He didn't want to just go run into the water. So I get him into the bathroom. There's fecal matter on his butt, tail, his backside. He clearly slipped and his hindquarters landed into the stuff. That then also got transferred to where he was laying in the bedroom next to me by the bed. So the whole place smells like, dog defecation. So I get him into the bathroom, lift him up over the side of the bathtub. He's, a 75-pound dog, definitely not light. And get him in there. He lays down. I turn the water on. He's not responding to the fact that he's in the bathtub, that the water's running and now touching his paws. And obviously, he's not looking right. So I'm trying to keep his head up and I'm not filling the bathtub, but I also don't want him to accidentally inhale water or drown or anything like that. So I'm trying to, I have the spray wand and I try to wash his hindquarters off. I'm trying to get him all cleaned, but his breathing is very labored. It's instead of it's very slow. And when he was filling up, just the way he was moving with the breathing was different than normal. But it became very clear that he was having, and I think at some point he did stand up a bit, but he could only stand up with his front paws. He very clearly could not operate his back legs. So I knew something was wrong. And when that hit my conscious, I started crying. And I was like, come on, buddy. Just get up. You're okay. You're not in trouble. But no matter how much I encouraged him, clearly nothing was happening and he couldn't do it. So me being the good dog dad, to hell with the accidents and anything else. I'm just focused on him and why he can't stand right now. And it's 6:30 in the morning. I look up his vet info. Don't really want to go to the emergency vet because that's going to be a huge bill. I had just taken him for a surgery, an emergency surgery the year before. And they have he had a cyst on his side that opened up while I was at work and he had blood coming out. And so I was trying to keep it on an economical side, but I knew that this was serious. So I look up his vet and I see that they open at 7. And I kept calling and calling and calling for the last 5 minutes of the 6 o'clock hour, just waiting for their phone system to just click on. I left the voicemail, I think, at like 6:58. And then at like, I think finally 7:01, I called again and I got through and I got the receptionist. And I said, hey, my dog is having a problem. I want to know if there's any like emergency appointments that I can get into today, like just have you guys see him. I was like, he can't stand. He's very weak in his back legs. Something's wrong. He had an accident. And she was very empathetic or sympathetic to the situation and said, based on what you're describing, I would recommend, like, we don't really have any openings right now, but kind of what you're describing, I would suggest you go to the emergency vet. And so, which makes sense. Why take him to, if it is a life-threatening thing, why take him to the everyday vet when they're like, oh, you should go to, like, why take someone to that urgent care or to the vet when, if you can justify an ER situation, you need to aim there first, and don't waste their time with tests or moving them around. Just get them to where they have all the equipment and the testing to figure out what's going on. So something's wrong with Cedric. I'm bawling. I get him out of the bathtub. I dry him off. I got his hindquarters washed, got his tail cleaned off, got the poop off of him. I wanted him to have, I knew that we're at this point heading to the vet because something's wrong with him, but I also wanted him to have the dignity of not being covered in poop. And so I dried him off. And anyway, I knew where my car was parked, and I knew that it was going to be hard if I went through the front door. I was going to have to go up a sidewalk, around the side of the building, and like it was just a huge way to go. Or I could go through the back door, and it was straight across the lawn to the parking lot. Thankfully, my car was like one of the first spots next to the leasing office. Like, I could see my car from the back door. So I started formulating a plan of how I'm going to get my dog to the car, because he can't walk and I have to carry him. So Cedric's just laying on the floor in the bathroom. He's wet. He's panting. His breathing's labored. And he can't stand up. So I open the door, close the screen just in case, out of habit, so he wouldn't walk out or anything. Even though I look like he couldn't anyway. So I rushed to my car. I had some things in the back area where he normally would hang out, and I, threw them into the back seat, put the seats down. No, I left the seats up, but I got everything out of the back so that he could have a nice flat place to lay. He had a blanket and a sheet back there for him that are still there, have not been messed with since that day. I just put things over them and let them be, but they're still covered in Cedric's hair. And I was out there maybe a minute, like super quick, just throw things, clear an area, open up the back hatch. Like, I'm making the quickest plan to get him out, get him in my car, and get the heck out of there. And when I got back to the back door, Cedric was laying by the back door. Somehow, some reason, he drug himself from the bathroom while I was out of the apartment He drove himself almost the full length of the apartment to the back door. He could see me while I was at the car. And again, I don't know how he did this, because every attempt I had tried to get him to voluntarily stand on his own, he wasn't standing. So I don't know if he drugged himself. I don't know if he found the ability to walk one last time, but somehow Cedric got himself to the back door. Cedric got himself closer to where I was. So I tried to get him to walk again, and that was fruitless. His breathing had changed. He was... I think that he was starting to lose consciousness. He was just pure dead weight, and I lifted him when he was alive, and he was heavy, but there's a different amount of weight when they're not helping at all. And anyways, I got him halfway out into the yard. I was carrying him. He was stretched out almost as tall as I am. I'm carrying him like bear hug under his armpits with his head next to mine. And I'm like, it's okay, buddy. It's okay. We're going to get you help. And my property manager, her and her husband were, Andrew, were up on the third floor at their apartment. And we didn't really talk at that point because we kind of butted heads a couple times. And I remember he yelled down, he's like, Everett, do you need help? And I was very stressed, and I'm like, yes. Unfortunately, I didn't wait for him to get down. I was like, time was moving at a glacial pace in my mind. It wasn't, he literally threw on some pants and ran. Anyway, he got down there as I was putting Cedric in the car. Maybe I should have waited and had to help carry on the other half of Cedric. I don't think that it would have changed the outcome, honestly, but who knows? So I finished getting Cedric into the car, and closed it up. Andrew was like, hey, I've lost dogs before. This really sucks. If you need anything, let me know. He offered to drive us there. I said, no, I think I can get it. And so off we went. I went back. I shut my door. I left it unlocked. I didn't care at that point. We left, went to West Vet. And thankfully due to the COVID thing, I couldn't go in. And I pulled into their emergency drive-up bay, and I knocked on the window. And normally I'm used to going in, telling them to come back, but the doors were locked, and I had to do this. I could see the person that I was talking to visually through the glass, but I had to talk through this intercom thing. And I was like, hey, my dog can't walk, and has labored breathing. And they said, okay, where are you? And I said, I'm right here in this drive-through thing. And he goes, okay, just go wait by your car and we'll get a crash team together and come out there. And so I'm waiting. It took like a minute and a half, 2 minutes for them to come out. 4 individuals came out with a gurney, rolled it up to the back of my car. Cedric's just laying there panting, doing his thing. And I guess one pause. I drove down Curtis to get to Chinden, and Cedric, I remember, stood up with his front legs and looked out the window on our drive as I was turning. And I remember looking in the rearview mirror, and I saw him looking around. And I was like, it's okay, buddy. We're going to get you some help. You're going to be fine. Anyway, and then we pulled up. They came out. It's very clear to them that this isn't good. Two of them lift Cedric up, put him on the gurney. The other guy is getting some basic information from me, like, have you been here before? What's your name, number, da-da-da. And he says, okay, I need you to go park in one of these spots again because I can't come in. And it was brand new pandemic. Like, we didn't have the mask stuff. And, like, the whole thing was such in its infancy that, like, it was just total, like, isolation and lockdown. And it's amazing that we even had services at that point. So he said, I need you to go park in a spot and do not leave. Do not leave our property. And I said, okay. And so I went and parked, and then I had a vet call me from inside, and she said, what's going on? I told her kind of a synopsis of everything. She said, is there anything that he could have gotten into? And he was really good about not eating things that he just found, but I also had to keep an eye on, like, he would find, like, dead birds, and when we'd go for, like, a walk inside, I'd constantly have to, like, look for things and make sure he either didn't get them or take them away from him if he did. So I was like, I don't think so. At the time, Jeremy was smoking those Juul pods, and I was worried that, maybe he found one and cracked through, like, residual liquid on an empty pod that somehow got on the floor. Because they were coming at it like, this looks like it could be like a poisoning type thing. And so I was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, there's a poison hotline that can help us, but you have to initiate the phone call and then get the case number and then give it to us, and then we can work with them after that. So I was like, okay. So I call the poison help number. It's an $80 phone call just off the bat. The vet also tells me, she's like, we don't know what's going on, but right now we're looking at least like just starting out, we're looking at an $1,800 bill just for everything. And I was like, okay. And she's like, it's going to go up from there the more involved we are. I'm like, okay. So I, try figuring out, like, is it potentially a tobacco poisoning? No, we don't see anything like that. They're getting ready to run tests, and they're like asking, like, do you want this and this? And the vet was so nice. She, she offered everything she could, but also at the same time too, I told her, I said, you're the professional. I don't want to have you do everything that you possibly can just for the sake of doing it. I said, if we get to a point where you, with all of your professional education, do not think that this is a fruitful thing to attempt, or we need to just give up because we've come as far as we can. I said, that is valuable, and let me know. And I will honor that suggestion. So I said, barring that, I want to do everything that we can for him. I knew that it wasn't going to automatically be like fruitful and all good, but I also knew that if I didn't do things for the sake of, I want to save the money or be frugal, or maybe we'll just, sleep it off kind of a thing. Like, I couldn't live with myself. I needed to prove to myself that I did everything I could for him. So I authorized all these tests. We did all these things. He was literally just about ready to go in for one of the most expensive tests by the point that he passed. Thankfully, he didn't complete the test. That would have added $500 to the bill. So she's like, I was just getting ready to start this test, and he crashed 3 times in their care. And I remember the first time she called just after 8. He had been there for hour and a half. She said, I just want you to know, Cedric just went into cardiac arrest. She said, we revived him and his heart's beating. He's still with us. But once they go into cardiac arrest, they're more prone to have that happen going forward. And she said it's not always guaranteed. They might not have it happen again, but more often than not, they have more episodes. So he ended up crashing again. So basically, that was when I had to authorize further resuscitation of him. And I said, obviously that's not good on his body either. So I said, if we're at a point where you feel like this isn't in Cedric's best interest and quality of life from it is not good, then let's not do it. So anyway, things went on. I was talking to my mom and my sister, and I was finally back at home and just kind of pacing back and forth, wondering what's going on. And finally, I was talking to my sister, and then my phone rang, and I recognized that it was one of the vet numbers. So I was like, hey, I got to go. And I switch over to the line that the vet's on, and she tells me that she was getting ready to administer the final test that I had authorized, the expensive one. And Cedric started to crash. They started doing like the doggy CPR. And she said a ton of fluid came out of him. She said it's all over the place. And she said, I think his body was telling us that he's had enough. And shortly after that, he passed. So I was very distraught. Called my mom, told her I didn't feel comfortable driving, but I wanted to go down to the vet and see him. And so my mom drove from Meridian to come pick me up and took me to the vet. And thankfully they have this beautiful courtyard with a fountain. Oh, and it was a beautiful sunny day. Like I commented to the lady, to the technician, I was like, Cedric would have loved being out here right now. Like he loved the sunshine. And anyway, so I was waiting back there for them to wheel him out, and he was on a gurney. Again, couldn't go inside because pandemic stuff, and it was still very gray. It was nothing structured like we've had for the last 9 months or so. Anyway, so I'm sitting in the back in the courtyard, and my mom walking back she forgot to roll up her window, so rolled them up after we'd both been sitting back there. And then I remember she was walking back, and we made eye contact. She was getting ready to come through the gate, and they rolled Cedric out on a gurney with a very soft Christmas-themed blanket over him. I could see his paw where the IV was. There was a bandage on it. And he was just laying there and looked like he was asleep. And my mom was on her way back. And I remember making eye contact with her. And she saw Cedric came out. I looked down, and my knees went weak. And I just dropped to the bench. And she started just jogging and came to the gate and was there to, console me through all that. And I'm so thankful that she was, because that was a lot to go through by myself. Anyway, so we sat out there for, I think, an hour in the sunshine, and Cedric was all warm from the sunshine and the blankets and everything. And it was just really peaceful. I got some pictures that I haven't shared, and out of respect to Cedric, I don't plan to ever. But I have them for myself. And anyway, they did a really great job. The doctor that I talked to came out and they were just very kind, all things considered with the whole COVID thing. And someone was like, oh, well, I hope you get to see them. And I remember saying, like, obviously with the gravity of this pandemic that was just getting started, I was like, people are losing their moms and parents and siblings. Like, they're losing human beings by themselves that are dying in a hospital and the family can't be with them. As much as it sucks, I would to not be with him, like actually like transitioning from life to death. As much as that sucked, I knew that it was that other people around the world were going through far worse stuff. And I needed to just be thankful that I had the opportunity that I had, because if people were just sucking it up and able to go through, knowing that their parent passed away and nobody was there with them, I could deal with, getting to see my dog out in a courtyard on a gurney after death. And that was more than a lot of human people had. So I was very thankful for that. Then they sent him off to Ada Crematorium and got a nice little plaster casting of his paw. Got a chunk of his red hair. They put it in a baggie, and I wanted him to be cremated by himself so that I could have just his ashes and not, they do like kind of a communal bury, and then you get, or cremation, you can get like some of other ashes or just by themselves. I wanted just him. I'm a bit of a purist that way. So, did that. I have his box sitting out in the living room ever since we got this house. He's been sitting in the same spot. He has his own table. And then a friend of Jeremy's, Lexi, did a great job of doing like a pen or pencil drawing from a picture. And Jeremy sent her a picture of Cedric at some point in his life. And she drew that as like a pencil drawing. So that's framed and sitting next to him. And it's really pretty. And obviously I've got like pictures of him other places. My sister did one of those cute things where you take the picture of your pet and you can put it on like the body of something else. And so it's a picture of Cedric. It's so cute. It's him when he was a puppy, and he's sitting on like a officer uniform or something. So it looks like he's like a soldier. And it's like Sir Cedric. So really cute. Just fun memorabilia stuff that I'll cherish. And like I said, I still have Cedric's stuff. I still have his ball. I have his collar. I have almost all of his bowls. I did donate what was remaining of his food to the Idaho Humane Society so that they could feed some dogs with his unused food. And so there was some good that came out of that. Unfortunately, Jeremy's dog doesn't really like to play fetch. So my dreams of her playing with Cedric's toys are kind of fading. So I think I might find a way to put his collection of toys to better use than just sitting around collecting dust. I'm obviously going to keep the spiky ball because that was his favorite. But and it's something small that I can hang on to, but the rest of them, they should be loved by somebody else. So yeah, that's my story of grief. And it was something that lasted for a long time. It wasn't just one and done. You get like, it came in waves. I definitely was impacted by it to some degree all the way through the end of 2020. After I, finally moved in with Jeremy, it became easier because I wasn't alone. Those months from end of April all the way till end of September was tough because it was just me and my thoughts, and it's really hard. Like, I've had a lot of deaths in my life, and death and grief are really natural parts of life, but it hits you even when you know that you're prepared and you grasp the principle of the situation. It hits you very hard, a lot harder when it's A, unexpected, and B, somebody that you lived with on a daily basis. It's one thing like, when your grandparents are getting older, or if you kind of know that it's coming or you don't live with them, that is considerably easier than when you suddenly go from having to consider and care for somebody on a daily basis in shared space, and then they're not there. You don't have someone to talk to. You don't have to care for somebody else. Obviously if it was a person, then you'd have that loss of income or, the skills that they have. But thankfully with it being a dog, it was, less for me to do. But at the same time, like all these things that were just part of a routine life suddenly were gone. And yeah, it was difficult. So I definitely battled with some depression after that. Had some darker days, but truthfully, like, have been really working on building and redefining a sense of purpose. And that's kind of what I want to help anyone listening to this with. When I was single, not that I was flippant with things in life, or I was a lot more reckless, not as like nothing, I'm sure, I know your mind can go so many different directions with that, but like, I drank a little bit excessively and, didn't, do any other drugs or anything, like, thank God. But, ever since being with Jeremy now, and part of my resolution for 2021 was just focusing on us, our future together, our future that we want with our kids, what kind of life we want to have, just kind of life beyond what was by myself. And so there's now, when I think about like my personal sense of worth and sense of self, it involves me, very much so. Like there's a lot more love for myself. There's also love, for me and Cedric, me and Jeremy. And I don't know, there's more of a determination to fight for things for all of that future, not just, what was with Cedric, a dog. So anyway, I hope that helps somebody. I hope you walk away and into somebody else's situation if they're going through grief, relate to them, but please don't ever try to diminish someone's situation or feelings based on your own understanding of the situation. You could be totally strong and power through something and it might not affect you that much, or someone might just have a little bit more invested in that basket and it broke. So, just be kind, and be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Know that grief is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Grief is not linear. Grief is not something that has an end date on the calendar. It can last a few weeks. It can last a few years, or it can last the rest of your life. It does get better. It does get less intense. You do learn to cope. You do learn to live without, and you do learn to live for yourself. One thing that I heard after his passing that I love is that grief is all the love that you once wanted to share, but now you can't. And I think that is so true. So go love those around you. Go love your pets. Give them a hug. Give them a hug for me. I ask people that now, and that's okay. Like, when I see people, posting about their pet, I'm like, hey, my dog passed away. Would you give him a hug for me? And people are like, oh, I totally will. Like, use that. acknowledge that somebody else has what you once had, and just be like, hey, will you give them a hug for me? Like, I miss having a dog, kind of a thing. Or I miss having a grandma, or I miss having a grandpa or parent or sibling, whatever it is, whatever loss that you went through. Use that to connect with others and relate and encourage people to love what they have while they have it. So I hope you made it through. I hope you didn't cry. If you did, it's okay. It means that you have a heart, and it means that you're a good person. So anyway, I appreciate you joining me for segment number 2 of this 3-part series. We've made it through abuse and grief, and it gets better. Next month, coming up in May, love. Me and Jeremy, we're going to talk about all that. Jeremy doesn't really want to come onto the podcast, but I think I'm going to push it. So, I mean, I'm more than happy to talk. I can run my mouth. But I told him, I was like, it's just you and me and a couple microphones, and I'm just going to hit record, and then it'll eventually get shared. But, so I hope you join us for that. And definitely a lot more upbeat and other new ideas coming up with the podcast. At some point, I would like to do a live session with on Facebook, on the page, and also Instagram. Kind of do like a live video thing. I believe there's a way for people to participate in that as well. So if you're not connected on the page or the Instagram account, it's at Everett Podcast at the end of Facebook.com or the end of Instagram.com. Just add at Everett Podcast. Also Twitter if you're there, at Everett, twitter.com/Everett Podcast. Connect with me, because probably in June or July, I want to do a couple live sessions and just kind of either have people post things in the comments and kind of direct that flow of the discussion. And if someone wants to, I believe there's a way to opt in and be able to talk, and then I can capture the recording. Anyway, I want to consolidate all of these sessions into a nice podcast and kind of, provide another way for people to be involved and interact and share their thoughts and direct kind of what they want to hear me talk about. So kind of a thing like, what are your thoughts on this? And then I can talk. And then if, someone really has an opinion they want to share, then they can jump in and actually be a voice in the conversation. And so that's something that I'm toying with, that I'd like to get out there at some point. So hopefully in July, maybe in June, but I will let you know. But you got to like and follow the pages and the accounts to know when that's coming up. And as always, if you have any questions, want to know where to subscribe, what platforms I'm on, you can go to podcast.everettmcconaughey.com. That's podcast, podcast. Everett, Everett, McConaughey is spelled McConaughey.com. And you can send a text message, call and leave a voicemail, share your voice at 208-391-2808. I hope you have a great rest of your week, rest of April, and until we talk next time in the month of May, I hope you have a great one. Take care. Stay safe. Be healthy. Spread love and smiles. And keep in touch.